we also have we also have closed captioning, and so you're gonna be able to access this um, discussion a couple of different ways. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Megan LeMay, who's a friend and colleague at the Alzheimer's Association. Anybody who lives in Western Massachusetts should have Megan on your speed dial. She's terrific. And she um, has helped in so many ways, including most recently on a driver training program. Who knew that when Megan started driving a metro bus, well, to pay for her college tuition, that she would later end up training on dementia and driver training. So we're glad to have you here. So Megan, take it away.
Thank you so much, Patty, and thank you so much for having us and convening this meeting. And yes, that is a fun fact about myself. I am a former, was a bus driver in a former life. So lots of different things that I've done. So today we're lucky enough to have a few panelists with us from our Alzheimer's Association Early Stage Advisory Group, which is a group of advisors and volunteer advisors who are living with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, who work to give us, feedback, information, suggestions, as well as participate and do a lot of speaking engagements, as well as often talking to the media as well on behalf of individuals living with Alzheimer's. So I will introduce our two panelists here. So the first panelist is Joe Montminy. Joe was diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's disease in 2017 at the age of 54. He lives in Plymouth, Massachusetts with his wife, Yara. They have two sons who are in their mid-20s, and prior to his diagnosis, Joe led a team that conducted market research on the individual annuity market that enables him to work with virtually every insurance company in the market. And Joe has been a strong advocate for those living with younger onset Alzheimer's disease, working on issues such as improved provider training, spreading awareness on the financial and emotional impacts of having this disease, improving accessibility to Alzheimer's resources, and collaborating with industry professionals to share coping strategies and support networks for those living with the disease. Joe also serves on the National Alzheimer's Association Board of Directors, the Alzheimer's Association Early Stage Advisory Group, and the Walk to End Alzheimer's Planning Committee. And our other panelist today is Judith Davis. Judith grew up in Winchester, Massachusetts. She earned a BA, an MBA, and an MBA, and was awarded the distinction of Presidential Scholar. She spent a year studying in Paris and attributes her love for art to having been fortunate enough to visit the studios of Picasso, Matisse, and Winslow Homer, and to her years as an executive traveling to cities at home and abroad, where she always made time to visit art galleries and museums. In 2001, Judith retired from a successful career as an executive in the high-tech industry. After retiring, Judith rescued her first piece of found metal and made it into a wall sculpture, thus becoming a sculptor. Judith lives with her husband and artisan John, Lily the cat, and her beloved hearing dog Annabelle, where she makes both her home and studio on Aquidneck Island in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. Judith is currently also living with Alzheimer's disease and serves on the Alzheimer's Association Early Stage Advisory Group. All right, so thank you both. So I'm just going to ask some questions to both of our panelists here so you can hear from them. And then we will have some time if you all have any questions for them too. We can open it up for that as well. So I will start with Joe. Joe, if you could describe the changes you first noticed in yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Megan. And thank everybody for giving me this opportunity. I would say I first noticed things when I was working probably a year, maybe year and a half before I was diagnosed, where I was having to work longer hours. I was taking a lot more notes in the meetings I was going to, and then having to review those notes because I couldn't remember all the details of what we talked about. I had done presentations, and I found that I was having to work just as hard on a presentation I was doing for the 20th or 25th time as I did the third time. You know, in 5 years before that, I could do a presentation 2 or 3 times, and then after that, just review the notes and not have to work about the same amount of time. So I knew I was working much, much harder to do the same things that I was doing. But I think one situation stood out in particular, and that was I was in a meeting with about 20, 25 insurance companies, discussing a bunch of things, going through the topics, and I was just having a hard time following the conversation. And it was after that that I knew I needed to go see the neurologist.
Thank you for sharing that, Joe. We'll go to Judith. If you, Judith, want to talk about the changes you first noticed in yourself that are related to Alzheimer's. Oh, you're on mute, Judith.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be on the panel. I'm sort of a different cat, I'm told by my neurologist, in that the changes I noticed in myself were physical. And it continues to be that way with my diagnosis. And what I mean by that was I had experiences like I might be sitting reading a book or watching a favorite program on television on TV, and suddenly I would lose my vision for a minute or 2 minutes, and then it would come back like nothing had happened. And then I started having things where I would be blurry, or the last time I drove, I was in the car and I was driving and suddenly I lost my vision. And I just, got home as fast as I could and handed John the keys. Now, you'll be interested to know that that was a full year before my diagnosis of Alzheimer's. A second issue that I had is that you were looking at an Oscar-winning faller, okay? I have had some of the most magnificent falls you could possibly imagine. Things like stepping up on a bus because John and I thought it would be a good idea to take the bus to Newport to avoid traffic in the summer, catching my foot on the top stair, and then literally sliding into the bus down the aisle on that horrible metal floor, like I was going to home base. And I could cite you many examples of falling. That occurred before my diagnosis. And then the third one that was of concern to me was that I was choking on things. Something is simple. I remember the first time it happened, it was scary because it was in a restaurant and it was on, I was living in California at the time, and it was on spinach in one of those warm spinach salads where the spinach is kind of slippery. So those were my symptoms, but the one that ultimately took me to see the neurologist was the big fall, a big fall, a different one from the one I just cited. And then I was ultimately, I met him in January, and it took him from January to July to diagnose it through what are now, pretty standard tests, everything from the, spinal tap to the, what do you call it? MRI and so on. So one of the reasons Megan likes to have me around once in a while is so that I get out there and I say to people, Alzheimer's is not just about memory loss.
Mm.
I fall because I have lost my spatial awareness marbles, okay? They're not in there anymore. And for me, spatial awareness, so friends say, when John says you have to Judith-proof the house, my friends say, oh, so you mean like baby proofing? No, in my particular case, you've got to baby proof anywhere that's within my reach with my entire body, or I'm going to trip over things, as someone on Thanksgiving threw it in the middle of my kitchen floor, forgetting. And I went ass over tea kettle and smacked my head on the corner of the counter. So, and the same is true with anything that's above my head. Okay, so if I'm at your house, Patty, and we're having a conversation and laughing, and I'm telling a story near your fireplace, and your beloved vase that you inherited from your grandmother is sitting there, it's done, it's over with. And I could, do a show and tell. We don't have time of all the things that I've broken around the house. So, John and I have a wonderful caregiver husband, and John and I spend a great deal of our time thinking about what are my symptoms, how do they manifest themselves in my daily life, and more important, every single solitary room, closet, cupboard, you name it, in this house has been redesigned to support what I can no longer see or do.
Thank you, Judith. Yeah, I think that's really helpful for people who are trying to think about how to create spaces that are more dementia friendly, whether that's in people's homes or in the more public environment, and spaces where people hang out. So thank you, Judith. All right, we're going to go to Joe with the next question. Joe, if you want to talk about when you first received your diagnosis, how did you feel?
Sure, I can talk about that, and I think it kind of also can relate a little bit back to what Judith was talking about, because it kind of gives those of you listening a little perspective on kind of some of the challenges that we're facing. Because Judith talked a lot about her spatial awareness. Well, for me, it was right. Some of my challenges in terms of getting the diagnosis was just the shock from getting the diagnosis, because many of us don't really know much or anything about Alzheimer's. Then you walk in, you do some testing, and all of a sudden the doctor comes out and tells you, Joe, you've got early onset Alzheimer's. But then when they explain the prognosis, you're going to see declines over the next 3 to 5 years, that you may not recognize your family in 5 to 7 years, and that you got a life expectancy of about 10 years. That's a major shock to you, not just emotionally, but financially. Having to retire, you've got lost income. For those of us that have early onset, you probably don't have enough money for retirement. So there are a lot of other issues that we're confronted with that make our life very challenging. So you just kind of know that people who live in your community, it's not just that they're having to confront some of these physical challenges of the decline, but you've got so many other things going on around you in terms of the shock, the denial, the disbelief, the frustration of thinking about all the life events you're going to miss. There's a lot of issues we're dealing with. Knowing that we can come out to a community and get involved and do things is a great outlet for us. But just know that there's other issues that we're dealing with that make life challenging as we come in there, to know we're just looking forward to anything you can have to offer us. But there are challenges that we're dealing with besides just the physical ones that I think it's important that you appreciate.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Joe. Judith, for the sake of time, we're going to go to the next question for you. If you can talk a little bit about what it was like when you first told family and friends about the diagnosis, and if you have some advice around that.
Sure. I would just say one sentence, which was my diagnosis was a great relief, because I'd had all these things I was suffering from, and my friends and relatives knew it, so that I could just tell them what it was a relief. I love to tell the story, which I think is why Megan wants me to tell this, is that I had one of my very close friends came over. This was after having been advised by my beloved Episcopalian minister, Jennifer, down the street, think about who you want to talk to and tell in person, as opposed to email or them hearing it from someone else. And so I thought about it, and this close group of people involves my very closest relatives and my closest friends. And so the first person I invited over, her name is Andrea. We sat out in the backyard. It was COVID because it was 2020, May, the end of June in 2020. We sat out in the backyard with our masks on, and she had sunglasses on, and we decided to move into the shade. And I said, so can you take your glasses off? And I had said to her, I finally have a diagnosis. I have Alzheimer's. She pulled her glasses off, and both of her eyes were not just a couple of drops, streaming with tears, right? And she looked up and she goes, Judith, this just sucks. And we started laughing. Okay. So from then on, that was the lead in to me telling the story, just like I've told it to you. And what I said to her was this: look, I'm going to be 80 March 11th. So it's not like I'm like Joe when he was diagnosed. All right. It's different for me. I've had a fabulous life. Now what I think about is, how do I live a legacy of love and laughter? And so that's what I told my best friends and relatives. And I said, if you want in, great. If not, bye, because I don't have time. And, immediately the question is always, how can I help? And I knew enough at that point, again, thanks to my priest, Jennifer, to say, I don't really know yet. I don't know yet. It's too soon. But now it's 2 years later, and I can tell you every single one of our people, in quotes, has a job. Like friend came over last week, spent 3 hours with me. Her mate took John off and got him the heck away from me so that he could have some time away from me. And this stuff happens all the time. Everybody, because of COVID, I have tea twice a week via FaceTime with my sister, just like our mother and our aunt used to have. And so we do these things to, as a result of my having been A, honest with them, and yes, relieved about my diagnosis. C, I immediately, upon decided then, if I have to put my money where my mouth is, and I spend all my time telling everybody in the world that I have Alzheimer's and watching reactions and thinking about it and talking about it, because there is a horrible stigma attached to the disease. And if I spend every single waking minute of my life from now until the day I die, it's going to be trying to help get rid of that stigma. And it does start with figuring out an easy way to tell people. It was easy for me because I had all these symptoms. It's not easy for other people. I mean, we have a person that we love and respect in our group, Megan and I, in the group that I'm in, and we've just discovered recently that she hasn't told many people. And yet she's out there about, doing things on behalf of the Alzheimer's organization, but she's afraid of the reaction.
Yes, thank you so much, Judith, for talking about that. And and you mentioned our support group too. So we have a great support group for people living with Alzheimer's, and people are at such different points, that some people feel like they can talk about this, and other people are still really struggling, when they first get a diagnosis. So we'll go to Joe and just ask Joe, if you want to talk a little bit about what it was like to tell family and friends about your diagnosis, and when you knew it was time.
Yeah, I think I'll try to make this really brief. In terms of when it was time, it took us 6 months before we actually shared with our immediate family my diagnosis. And at that point, it was only the high level. It probably took us another 2.5 years before we shared with them the very specific prognosis, only because for the first 6 months, we weren't ready. And then after that, we struggled with when's the right time to tell them the specific details, only because we knew it was going to be difficult for them to deal with the realization that we're going to be missing out on some very important life events with them. So that was really hard for us to determine when was the right time. And that's going to vary for everybody, but that's a really hard part of disclosing the diagnosis. And also just the whole reality of dealing with the challenges as the disease worsens. So it's all those things that you're juggling with. It's just never easy.
Thank you, Joe. So we want to go to this next question because we do think it's so important. Judith, what if you want to quickly just talk a little bit about some of the activities that are still so important to you and what brings you joy?
Yeah. I think people probably think I'm the strangest bird in the world, but I consider my Alzheimer's a gift. And here's why. I know that a lot of marbles have fallen out of the left side of my brain. And so John and I have an agreement. We sit down and we talk about what is difficult for you now, Judith, because I did all of it, the finances and the insurance papers and all that stuff for years. I don't find it easy anymore. It takes me forever. I make mistakes. I've made mistakes, and so on. And so I basically am honest with him and say, I don't want to do that anymore. And then he and I spent some time figuring out how for him to take it over and so on. Now, what has that done for me? I would have to say that I spend my life now about 85% in the right side of my brain and the rest of it in my left, which I avoid at all possible costs. Now, for me, what that means is something very freeing, such as if you force me to sit in front of a computer and have to do something that has to do with taxes or whatever that takes me forever, by the time I'm done, I am literally shaking. I'm miserable. I'm like, I hate it, and so that's so different from spending my days the way that make me happy, or in doing some of the things that bring me joy. And the things that make me happy are making art, writing. I'm writing a book called A Legacy of Love and Laughter, and doing the work that I've started doing with the Alzheimer's Association, or speaking engagements and so on. And I'm very, very interested in doing something more for art for Alzheimer's. In December, I was the featured artist at a gallery over in Tiverton in a show called Show Ho Ho Art for Alzheimer's. And it was a lot of fun. All the artists who were in it, gave 50% of whatever they earned to the Alzheimer's Association and so on and so forth. I've become acquainted with the state reps, the two state reps, and then recently with Senators Reid and Senator Whitehouse. And I've been in communication enough that I got introduced to the Secretary of State of Rhode Island, and the person who works for her, who is the curator of the brand new fabulous museum that is now down in the basement of the State House in Rhode Island. And I'm in contact with her and about doing a huge show, art for Alzheimer's. And I'm really excited about it. And, we'll definitely, I think, support the bee I have in my bonnet, which I've talked about with Senator Whitehouse, which is, you can invite all these research companies in and they'll tell you all about what they're doing with the research and so on. And I just want to say, barf, the people in there, they don't know anything about science. They need a story. I've even put my hand up and said, I will go in there and tell my story. so that they know what it's like to be living with the disease. Because it makes such a huge difference. And I will say that it brought me a great deal of joy when I gave my speech at the opening of this art show. I call it my Look at Me speech, and basically just saying to people, by the way, there were about 75 people. I said, how many of you know someone with Alzheimer's? Or dementia or Lewy body, every hand in the room went up. Then I said, how many of you think that it's all about memory loss? Every hand but 3 went up. 3, folks. So 70 people had no idea that the symptoms I have. And I said to them, well, my speech is about a half an hour, and by the time you leave, you're going to know otherwise. You know, I described what it's like to have dysphagia, choke in public and have people scared. I talked about my falls and so on. And at the end, I just say, look at me. And they just, you know, they look at me like, what you going to say next? And I say, please remember, the next time you meet someone who has Alzheimer's, or you learn of someone who has Alzheimer's from your friend, my grandmother has it, try to remember me and what I said. Look at me and look at that person and just ask one question. What's it like living with the disease for you? Because it's different for all of us. You know?
Thank you, Judith. Thank you so much for detailing some of that. We'll go to Joe, and Joe, if you just want to talk a little bit about activities that you do and what brings you joy.
Sure. Well, for me, in terms of the joy part, first of all, you can kind of appreciate that I'm kind of at a stage in my life where I'm actually enjoying my best life. And that's not the same for everybody. There could be people, you know, for those folks on the call in your community living with dementia that are at different stages of acceptance. And that's really going to impact our level of joy. But for me, I really enjoy spending time with my family and friends. I try to get out and go hiking and walking and do new hobbies. And when I think about what some of the dementia-friendly communities could do to help bring joy to folks in their areas, some of the activities would be like social and leisure activities. Things like, you know, board games, card games, puzzles, painting, where I can get out, if I was getting out, could get out and get involved socially with folks, or recreationally going on nature walks, or do meditation, yoga, dancing. I think those are things that would be great that communities could offer that would help to keep us engaged. In terms of actual activities, specific activities, I also try to do something really meaningful. And for myself, that's getting a lot more involved with the Alzheimer's Association. I want to get out there and raise awareness of the impact this disease can have, and that there, as Megan mentioned earlier, that there's a need for improved access to resources and support. But what I think dementia-friendly communities could do in terms of offering activities would be more around civic and cultural. Things like the community gardening, help people in your community with dementia find ways to get involved with organizations, or help them to get access to some cultural things like churches or museums.
Megan, could I just say one quick thing about joy that I've been thinking about now? For some reason or other, we've been talking and thinking about this for 4 or 5 days, which is, what if we were, as friends, relatives, professional people who deal with Alzheimer's and so on, what if every single person who has this disease were asked the question, what brings you joy? And then once they know the answer, and you know the answer, what if you were to say to them something as simple as, then do it. Find time to do it every day, 3 times a week, 4 times a week. I mean, it's amazing the answers you get. And then they also say, but I can't because I have to learn to, like our friend did. I have to teach myself how to use my Kindle, you know, those book things. And I'm like, why do you have to do that? And she said, what do you mean? I said, get somebody else to show you how to do it and get it over with so that you can do what you just told me brings you joy. You know, I just
Right.
want to be able to say to every single person I know with this disease, stop doing the stuff that is making you feel miserable or making your brain hurt. Instead, spend your life doing the things that bring you joy, make you feel good, and make you feel like you're still a productive a person.
Right. Yes, and I think even just the concept of talking about people who have a diagnosis like Alzheimer's and just connecting that to talking about joy, for some people that alone is radical because often people just associate this disease with only negative, has so many negative connotations. And so to talk about joy and feeling joy and doing all these activities that you both do is just so radical and so amazing. So just getting that idea out there too, I think is so powerful.
Megan, can I just throw one thing in relating to that? Because I would
Yes.
say right now, I'm living my best life, not because of how bad the disease is, but because it's opened my eyes to how precious time is. So
Mhm.
I'm much more focused with when I'm spending time, who I'm spending my time with, and I'm in the moment and enjoying that moment. And it's amazing how much more I'm getting out of it now that I didn't before because life was so busy. So as much as I know there are issues and the things I got to deal with, the time I'm enjoying right now, I'm enjoying it way more than I ever did before because of how focused I am on it.
Absolutely.
You know, and Jill, that's a really good testament for why the support groups work so well, because we hear these things from one another. And yes, Megan, you're right. I mean, I'm sure there are people in our group who think I'm a raving lunatic because I'm happy most of the time. However, there are other people in the group that we teach each other things. I mean, it's amazing what we learn from each other and the things we dare to do or say or be because we've been in the group and someone else in the group has done it.
Well, and Megan, I'm going
Right.
to piggyback off that because that kind of gets to something about the dementia-friendly communities. So I know Beth had mentioned to me in the chat that, you know, they have these memory cafes, and that's a good example. If people can't get to a support group, going to those memory cafes is a place where you can go and get that interaction and companionship and a chance to talk. And I think having those is invaluable to all of us.
Yes,
You know, and
absolutely.
me, ever the strategic thinker, I want to say, how do we make it a dementia-friendly world
Yes.
where the stigma's gone and everybody can live in the kind of kitchen I now live and feel safe?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's everyone's vision here. And yeah, so I just wanted to, I know, Joe, you both talked about this a little bit, but is there anything else you want to mention about, yeah, how can the dementia-friendly communities work actually be even more inclusive of people living with dementia too? So I know one thing we did today was just putting on the closed captioning, which is like a really small example of something that can make Zoom meetings more dementia and age friendly. And so, but is there anything else you two wanted to mention around just how to be more inclusive of people living with dementia? And then we'll open it up. If anyone from the audience has any questions or comments for the panelists, feel free to ask a question.
Go ahead, Judith. I'll let you go first.
What's that, Joe?
Did you want to go first? Did you want to go first in terms of?
I have one question, which is, I have this architect friend, and I've got to be in my bonnet to bribe him and take him out to lunch and say, what if we were to build a model of a top to bottom dementia-friendly house that's beautiful, instead of all these kind of kludgy things that people do to make a house look better? You know, what if we were to do something like that? And then that, you know, blows into a community, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, I'm dying to hear what you have to say, Patty.
You should know, Judith. Well, first of all, I cannot thank you and Joe enough for joining us today. Judith, you are welcome at any time in my home. I'd love to hear about your life and your travels. I dream of living in Paris. I mean, you really have done it all. And Joe, I admire you so much for putting yourself out there, for thinking so carefully about how to deliver this message. And, you know, I have kids in their mid-20s, and they are a challenge enough, let alone struggling to communicate with them about what you're going through.
Yeah.
So I just have a tremendous amount of respect, and I wish I had more empathy for what you're going through. But one of the projects that I am working with in a different part of my world is how to design dementia-friendly infrastructure. And we have a whole group of architects who have come to help us figure out how to do that. And I will share eventually with this group what we come up with. But this is done under the auspices of the governor's Commission on Alzheimer's and other dementias. And the work is almost completed. So that is stage one. Stage two of the work is that we are trying to incorporate dementia-friendly design into state procurement so that different procurements that come out from the state will acknowledge dementia-friendly design and also articulate what it means.
This is
So we're
very
working on it.
exciting. I really like hearing this. It's funny, I was talking about it to one of the gals in our group, Megan Barbara, and she and I were talking, she's like, oh, Judith, that's such a great idea. Wouldn't it be nice to go into a kitchen if you're 5'5" and know that the highest you have to reach is this and the lowest you have to reach is, you know, just below your belly button for, you know, all the things that you need on a day-to-day basis. And for me, it's imperative because if I lean over beyond that, I fall on my face. So the whole kitchen has, you know, been redesigned to help me in that way.
And the only thing I would add, Patty,
I mean, to me, it's a, I'm sorry, Jim.
no, go ahead. I can let you finish.
I'm sorry, no, that's okay.
Are you done? I was just going to add to Patty about the whole procurement and thinking about designing stuff for this whole dementia-friendly environments and communities. One of the things, and I didn't think I had time for it, but I'm going to share it really quickly, that I had, and let me see if I can get there quickly, is if you look on the Alzheimer's website, they actually have things that actually, let me get this out of the way here, that has a home safety checklist, and it goes through every room in a house and how to go about making those rooms safe from a Alzheimer's dementia perspective overall, and then going down to each of the different rooms. And I found this incredibly valuable. For example, in the kitchen, this top one, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but it talks about using appliances for auto shut off. And that may seem pretty straightforward, but in my support group, we've had at least 3 people who've been kicked out of their kitchen because they've left the stove on. So my point is, there's some excellent resources on that kind of website that can help you as you're thinking about how to design some of these places and rooms and activities to make sure they're designed in a dementia-friendly way.
You know, it's interesting. It just occurred to me, Joe, listening to you talk, that I don't know if you do this. I'm thinking you probably do, but as I mentioned earlier, I'll tell everybody who listens to me that I have Alzheimer's. And the advantage to that is, if I'm in a store and I'm confused, I can say to someone, you know, I'm lost, I can't find my husband, it's making me nervous, or whatever. Or I'll say, you know, do you mind helping an old lady who has Alzheimer's do thus and so? You would, I mean, I could tell you story after story after story, whether it's at the pink counter at Lowe's or something else. Could you slow down, please? You know, it takes me a while to comprehend. And then at the end of it, to be able to look at this young man who's helped me do something and say, you know what? When you see your mom tonight, or the next time you tell your mother that she should be very proud of you for helping an old lady with Alzheimer's, you know, and these kids are great because they're fascinated. They don't have any, there's no stigma around them. It's fascinating to me. I even find that even though before I had Alzheimer's, I always felt like these kids today are so darn smart because of the internet. They don't really look at me as an older person like I did my grandparents or great aunts, as someone who dispenses wisdom, right? They just don't. Whereas now they listen to me because they know nothing about Alzheimer's and they find it interesting.
Thank you, Judith. Yeah, thank you both so much for sharing and for giving us this perspective. And so I know we're out of time, but Patty did say we could go over a couple of minutes, so we did. But so we are out of time. But if anyone has any last second things they want to say from the audience, feel free. But there are some wonderful comments in the chat for both you, for both Judith and Joe. Just thanking you so much for being here and sharing this important perspective. So thank you both.
So Megan, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes and let others ask questions if there are.
I'd love to know, I'm the kind of person who loves to be critiqued and I don't even know Joe that well, and I know him well enough to know that he will like my question as well. Are these the kinds of things that you want to hear from with people living with dementia or living with Alzheimer's? And if yes, great. If not, let us know, you know, because I know that I want people to understand what it's like to be living with it, and you know, not just sitting around saying, okay, I've got a terminal disease. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm damn well not terminal today. So
last time I
why
checked,
not, you know? Go ahead, sorry.
you know, last time I checked, Judith, none of us are getting out of here alive, as they say. So Jillian, I think you have a question.
Yeah, more so a comment and some feedback. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it's so much more impactful. Like you were saying, you don't want to hear a bunch of researchers come in and talk about their data. Like that's just, it's just not as impactful or as effective as your stories would be. So yeah, thank you so much for both for sharing. It was very helpful.
Oh, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Susan Curtin, do you want to jump in here?
I just want to echo that same sentiment. It's really important for people to hear the stories and the experience of the people who are experiencing dementia and Alzheimer's. And I think it's also important for us when we do these types of things to hear from the caregivers themselves the care partner along with the person to kind of share their experience together with us. In order for us to, you know, we're starting this process of looking at dementia friendly in our community, and we're looking at designs for a new senior center, and we want to be sure we're including all of that with it. And hearing the things that you, especially the activities that you enjoy doing and participating in, that's so helpful for us because that will help us to plan in the future to make sure that we're supporting folks in our community. So thank you for sharing your stories.
And I'll just mention too, at the Alzheimer's Association, if you meet anyone who's interested in joining our early stage advisory board, we welcome individuals who are living with Alzheimer's, who are in the early stages and want to kind of contribute or provide their feedback and ideas and participate in the early stage advisory group with us. You can contact me about that.
Well, I just wanted to sort of review a little bit what I heard from Judith and Joe. And just from the selfish perspective of a dementia-friendly community. So one is that we need to make sure your voices are at the table, first and foremost. and whether it's a person living with the disease or a caregiver. It's just really important to have that input. Secondly, you both mentioned support groups and whether they've been done in person or most recently probably online. It's really important to have them accessible. I also heard a conversation about memory cafes, and thanks to Beth for putting a link into the chat bar about how you can access more information. I apologize, Judith, because those memory cafe links are just to Massachusetts, but I'm guessing you have a comparable list in Rhode Island. Joe, you also talked about access to social activities, to things that you can engage in the community. And can you talk a little bit more specifically about what you mean about that?
You mean in terms of social activities and doing stuff? Well, it's more just getting out and getting involved. Like our town has a local pickleball area where we can go to where they had tennis courts and they've changed them over so you can actually, people can get out and just get out and socially play activity, do pickleball. We've got a walking area here in Plymouth where we can go out and walk and just get out and get them and just get out into the, you know, and out in the fresh air and do things. Those kind of things for me has been very helpful, just because I don't feel like I'm stuck here at home. You know, so whether it's walking through town or a nature walk, for me, it's just invaluable to be able to get out and do things with others in the community.
Any other questions?
Are you asking me now?
The only thing I would say is I put in the chat, Patty, just a couple more guides that I didn't have time to talk about, but there's some great things that as people help people who have dementia in your community are good resources to help them with strategies on how to maintain their quality of life, as well as just a nice guide for people who are diagnosed with the disease, how to just deal with the diagnosis, because you'll be amazed at how many people, myself included, and many of my support group, got very little direction from my neurologist and doctor on how to deal with the diagnosis. You know, we got great information from them on, here's your diagnosis, let's deal with how to treat it, you know, the symptoms, whatever, but not how's it going to impact your life and how do you live with it? I got virtually none. And so that's one great thing that many people, many communities could do, is just how to help that person find acceptance and live with the disease. And the support groups is an amazing way to find acceptance, but living with it is staying engaged, getting out and doing things, participating, all this stuff that all these activities we've talked about, but you know, helping them get there is an important part of the process, and giving them information, assistance, resources, knowing how to deal with the whole disease, you know, is an important part of the process that we got very little direction in that. And just, you can't just assume that the neurologists and the doctors are doing that, because they're not.
I learn every day that they're not doing that, and it troubles me, but when I'm king of the world, I'll fix that.
You know,
But these are little things our community can do, our communities can do.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Judith, sorry.
you know, I think something that we could do as a community caring about people living with dementia or Alzheimer's is help people understand that their care team is wider than the person they're living with. Excuse me, that their dementia-friendly community or their team, or John and I call it our people, include neurologists, PCP, cardiologists, my eye doctor, my two, you know, my sister, my brother, my two closest friends, etc. This is all the care team. And Megan knows, because I'm constantly talking about it in our group. the importance of teaching people how to talk to their doctors, how to prepare for their doctors. It's not just a paper checklist. I advise people, and it works so well, is to really get to learn the importance of the patient portal. The fact that Dr. Douglas will check on me and say, how's the concussion? My neurologist, all right? And I'll write back, A, B, C, D. He might not look at that email until 9 o'clock at night when he's got his feet up and is at home, but he really appreciates knowing how I'm doing. And vice versa, when I go to see him, I always let him know what I want to talk about. I don't care what doctor it is, PCP, whatever. I think patients need to be taught how to use the resources that are available to them in the medical world, but also how to get their doctors talking to each other, how to give their doctors permission to talk to each other. All our doctors can talk to each other behind our backs. And it's really great because I go in to see my PCP and she'll look at me and she say, I just heard from Dr. Douglas that blah. You know, they're all on my team. And that can be true for, you know, for so many people, but they don't know how to go about doing it. You know, we've been teaching people in our group, right, Megan? I mean, we have been teaching people.
Yes, absolutely. And it just, yes, it's so great. Like you said, like there's so many benefits in the support group, that so many different things people learn from each other in the support group, and everything from, you know, how to better interact with your doctor to how to access different resources, or even the best, you know, equipment to buy to help you, you know, all kinds of things. So yes, thank you so much, Judith.
Well, I also see in the chat that we've posted how you find or how you refer a person to a support group. And thanks also to Joanne for talking about the programs that are offered in Duxbury. So we have a lot of resources across the state.
And can I tell you that as far as I'm concerned, I could not live without my social worker / therapist. I've had Rebecca since a week after my diagnosis. John has a counterpart to her in the same association. They have helped us reorganize our lives. They've helped us decide which forms, legal forms, we want to make sure are filled out and organized. They've helped with, you know, helped me decide, you know, what are the safety measures that have had to be taken in different rooms and so on. I can't say enough for her. And I could just say, you know what, Rebecca, I don't feel like doing anything today but whining about the fact that this concussion has kept me napping for weeks. And I'm not a napper. I need to get out and do things. You know, it's amazing. It's amazing being able to talk to her and say, you know, John's driving me crazy because he's not doing this. And then she has our permission to tell his therapist, you know, John's driving Judith crazy. So then that therapist will make a suggestion to John, right? And a couple of days later, John might say to me, you know, I was thinking I might do thus and so. And I burst out laughing and he looks at me and we both laugh because he knows darn well where the idea came from. But, you know, this is all part of your team, you know, and
right. And I think there's even still, you know, there's, for some people, there's stigma even against having a therapist. So, you know, just talking about that to people and talking about the benefits of accessing those resources is helpful to hear. And I'll just mention
remember the man in our group a couple of weeks ago, he said he knew he should talk to one, but he wasn't sure what to say. And I looked at him and I said, spill your guts. No one's listening. And he thought that was a great idea. You know.
Yes. And I'll just mention for the support groups too, like we also encourage you, you know, in the individual senior centers, and COAs can start their own support groups, of course, and memory cafes. So you can host a support group at your senior center. And especially hopefully once we get back to more in-person support groups too, that you can host a support group. And it is a pretty simple offering, but can be so helpful. And and at the Alzheimer's Association, we can, of course, we offer free training for facilitators. So if you want to go through our support group facilitator training, you can do that and then host your own support groups for either caregivers or for people living with the disease.
Megan, the other thing you and I have talked about is the possibilities of filming parts of, you know, the sections of the house here that, you know, might teach something. I don't know if anybody here knows how we could go about doing something like that, but there's a lot to be learned. Just a thought.
Well, I want to go ahead and thank Joe and Judith for joining us. The chat bar is full of great comments and suggestions, and major applause to both of you, and best of luck
Thank
with
you.
the rest of your journey.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you
But
for
you are welcome
trusting us.
anytime. So I now need to shift the agenda to a couple of issues that have been, I've been asked about as towns continue to pursue being dementia friendly. So one of the questions that I've been asked is, when do we sign the dementia friendly pledge? And the pledge is signed when you have a sense of what you're doing, like what's your action plan? You have a team together, you have a plan, and you have an elected official who's willing to join you in your work. And now we are finding that most communities do age and dementia friendly together, which is the right way to do it. The hard part is that AARP National controls age friendly, and we in Massachusetts have dementia friendly Massachusetts, and the two don't mesh as well as we would like them to. But the moment that you have an advisory committee, an action plan, and some elected official, whether or your town administrator, who's willing to commit, that's when you sign the pledge. So just to be clear about the process. And there are some communities that are even on this call in Boston, maybe, that have done all the work and they just need to do the paperwork. So we're helping folks who've already done all the work to go ahead and step up.
Patty, you'll be happy to know it's in the works next week, probably.
Woohoo! With your new mayor, I'm very impressed. I've also had questions about the whole sustainability of the initiative question. And I've gotten this a couple different ways, but it all boils down to, how do you keep this going once you get it started? And they're, you know, under the AARP model, they have a system where you're supposed to have an accountability system, right? You do an assessment, you do an action plan, and then after you implement it, you do another plan. So AFDF has that. In terms of dementia friendly, what we have found is that if you just keep your group together, not meeting once a month, but meeting every 6 months, just sustaining the commitment and the work that you're doing. And, you know, once you get a supportive day program up, a memory cafe, you know, have a bunch of dementia friends, do some memory training, all of these things that you're doing in your community, we're finding that once you get them started, they're in such need that people want them to keep going. So that's, those are the two questions that I've gotten this week. I'll continue to share more, but I think the other parts of these initiatives is that they're all very unique. And sometimes, I just had this yesterday, where somebody said, how much does it cost to become age and dementia friendly? And the answer is, I can't answer that because each initiative is different. Each initiative has different components. There's all, the differences are amazing when you look across the state. And so I can't give you a price tag if that's what your town is looking for. Janet, you asked a question about dementia-friendly efforts embedded in diversity, equity, inclusion. I have not seen that yet, but I think that, only in Massachusetts, we only have 24% of the towns dementia-friendly. So we are still learning. And when I look across the action plans, they've got a lot on their plate. And so adding that dimension tends to come a little later, as Megan has noted. Megan's been working on dementia-friendly Springfield for a long time. So I think it tends to come a little bit later once you get the initial plan and assessment in place. So, we have
Yeah, I
some
just
great-
wanted to say, if you're doing a combined effort with the age-friendly plan, I've had the little pedals memorized because I've said it so many times, but one of them is social inclusion, and I guess I haven't. Social inclusion, it's a few components, but we are working towards including a dementia-friendly element in our action plan to be inclusive as well. So if you're doing both efforts at the same time, then more than likely you'll have to at least start memorizing or jogging ideas down.
Well, one of the other things that is good to know is that Massachusetts is the only state in the country that has an inclusion model. So the toolkit that we have talks about both age and dementia friendly, and we blended the initiatives. So you don't have to memorize both of them. So any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much for participating, and we'll see you next month. Please call if you have questions, okay?
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.